The house was too quiet. After the last condolence bouquet had withered, after the casserole dishes had been returned to their owners, and after the last distant cousin's car disappeared down the driveway, silence swept through the grand old house like a tide reclaiming the shore. The echo of footsteps on polished marble, once softened by familiar voices and laughter, now rang hollow. My mother's presence, once so commanding even in her stillness, had vanished entirely. We buried her on a Wednesday. The funeral was elegant, tasteful, and thoroughly impersonal. My siblings and I arranged everything through a prestigious service that guaranteed dignity and discretion. We didn't linger. We stood in stiff black clothes under the heavy sky, clutching umbrellas and wiping away dry tears for the benefit of the cameras. Some of us cried, but not from grief, more from obligation or discomfort. My mother had lived too long, outlived too many, and been forgotten in too many subtle ways. When she was first hospitalized, the calls started flying in not to her but to each other. We coordinated who would visit, who would sign, who would ask the questions. When it was my turn, I brought flowers and sat for 30 minutes, nodding while she spoke in halting breaths about dreams I no longer understood and memories I couldn't place. She clutched my hand, and I remember only feeling the papery fragility of her skin, not the warmth of her love. She died quietly. Not alone, no, she had someone with her, but it wasn't me. Not my sister, not my brothers, not even her priest. It was the maid, the same woman who had been in the house for nearly 20 years, the one who we never quite called by name, always the maid or her help. Her real name, Lan, was etched into my mother's will. I didn't even know how to pronounce it properly. After the funeral, the house became a waiting room. My siblings gathered there, not out of grief, but anticipation. There was the matter of the will, and everyone knew that mother had amassed more than sentimentality. The property itself, the land, the hidden stocks, the vintage jewelry, the rare piano signed by Horowitz, all of it had become a sort of myth in our family lore. And it was time to divide the myth. The lawyer arrived on Saturday. He was thin, pale, and precise. His briefcase clicked open like a vault. None of us spoke as he pulled out the envelope. We were seated in the main hall, beneath the vaulted ceiling and crystal chandelier that mother had insisted on cleaning by hand until her joints failed her. The place smelled like polished wood, old perfume, and lilies left too long in water. My brother tapped his foot. My sister glanced at her phone. The lawyer cleared his throat. He said this would be read exactly as she had written it, with no edits, no interpretations. She had written it in her own hand, he noted, and had it properly notarized 6 months before her death. She had titled it, oddly enough, "A Letter to My Children." The first few lines were expected. Formalities, memories, reflections on motherhood, but soon the tone shifted. She spoke of her loneliness. How the house, once a vibrant battlefield of laughter and life, had become a mausoleum long before she passed. She recalled holidays missed, birthdays forgotten, and the long quiet of Sunday mornings when no one called, and only the clock dared tick in the living room. Then she spoke of Lan. She wrote that Lan had seen her through her darkest hours, had fed her when she refused to eat, had warmed her hands when they trembled. She described how Lan had read to her at night, brushed her hair when it tangled, and most painfully of all, how Lan remembered her favorite song when even we, her children, had forgotten. And then she revealed what none of us expected. She was leaving the house, the stocks, the jewelry, the accounts, everything to Lan. There was a sharp inhale, not from me. I just sat there, my eyes locked on the open window where the garden breeze barely stirred the curtains. My siblings exploded behind me, but it sounded distant, like shouts through glass. I felt something deeper than shock. It was shame. Cold, creeping shame. Because she was right. We had become visitors to her life, not participants. We loved her in the abstract, with cards on birthdays and messages sent through assistants. But we had let her grow old alone. We had trusted her comfort to a woman we barely acknowledged. Lan remained silent throughout. I watched her hands tremble. I thought she might speak. She didn't. The lawyer handed her a sealed envelope, private correspondence, he said. She tucked it gently into her sweater. Then she excused herself. The sound of her footsteps leaving echoed like a closing chapter. That night I stayed in the house. The others left in a flurry of curses, disbelief, and plans for lawsuits. I did not have the energy for rage. I wandered through the rooms. Our childhood rooms, the dining room where we once spilled soup and laughter, the garden path where she used to sit with a book under the lemon tree. I passed her bedroom, then paused, hand resting on the frame. It was still hers, still warm with her scent, the faint trace of rosewater and tea. The bed was neatly made. A shawl lay folded at the edge. On the nightstand, a worn, leather-bound journal sat beneath her reading glasses. I picked it up. The pages were full of shaky handwriting. Some entries were simple, notes about the weather, about her pain, her medication. Others were heartbreakingly intimate. She had written about each of us, our successes, our coldness, her hopes that we might return to her not for money but for love. In one entry, she wrote that she had tried to call me but hung up before it rang. She was afraid I'd answer in a tone of inconvenience. I closed the journal slowly. The house creaked around me. It was not haunted by ghosts but by memory. And I was suddenly, profoundly aware that I had lived among those memories only in photographs and passing mentions. I walked out to the back porch. The garden was blooming. Lan had kept it beautiful. My mother used to say that gardens were the only part of her world that made sense. Things lived, died, and bloomed again with quiet dignity. They didn't beg for attention, they just needed care. That night I cried for the first time in years. Not for the loss of inheritance, but for the loss of a mother I had already lost long ago and never tried to find again. The day after the will reading, everything felt like it was spinning. The house, once bustling with the noise of family gatherings and chatter, now felt hollow, like a relic of some forgotten past. My siblings, those who hadn't already packed their things and left, were still fuming, walking in circles in their old rooms, as though they could undo the truth my mother had left behind. They had every right to be angry, I knew that, but I felt nothing but numbness. The house was too big for any of us to understand it fully, and the air seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. The distance between us had always been there, but now it felt like an impenetrable wall. There was nothing to say anymore. The truth had already been set in motion. I walked through the hallways that morning, my feet quiet against the polished floors, pausing occasionally to look at the old portraits hanging on the walls. There she was, my mother, elegant as ever. She was smiling in every picture, her eyes alight with the energy I remembered as a child, the woman who seemed unshakable, untouchable. Now all that was left were shadows of her smile, ghosts of her laughter. I couldn't help but wonder what she would have thought, seeing us so divided. I stood in front of the old mirror she used to admire herself in every morning. I saw the reflection of myself, a man in his 40s, weary-eyed and aged by the weight of years that had come without notice. The man staring back at me was one I didn't recognize. I had let my career take over my life, my ambitions cloud my vision. I had always thought there would be time to fix things, time to make amends. But time had come and gone, and now my mother was gone, and with her, any chance of reconciliation. The house was quiet, too quiet. I walked to the kitchen, expecting to find the mess of dirty dishes that always accumulated after a family gathering. Instead, it was pristine. The cabinets were stocked, the counters wiped clean. The familiar scent of fresh bread, cinnamon, and coffee was gone, replaced by an eerie, sterile smell that I could barely place. I had forgotten what it felt like to sit at this table, to have breakfast as a family. When I was a child, we used to gather here every morning, arguing over who would get the last pancake or who forgot to make the coffee. Now that image seemed like a dream. The table, once filled with laughter, now sat empty. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the vacant seat where my mother used to sit. She would always pour the coffee, and we would sit together, chatting about the day ahead. There was nothing left but silence and the guilt that gnawed at me from the inside out. The lawyer had left, and the house was still. It was only then that I realized just how empty it had become. Lan, the maid, had taken her leave after the will reading. She had gone to her small apartment, leaving everything behind. The inheritance, the house, everything was now in her name. And yet it was still my mother's house, the house I grew up in, the house where I had felt safe, loved, and wanted, the house that now felt like a stranger's. I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the fireplace. I could see the faint remnants of ashes from a fire that had long since died. The warmth had faded, and I had no desire to rekindle it. It was strange how things could change so quickly, how one decision could turn everything upside down. I thought about Lan. I had never really spoken to her much, not in the way I should have. She had always been the quiet one in the background, taking care of my mother, tending to the house, doing everything with such precision and care. I had always dismissed her presence as part of the furniture, something that simply existed in the periphery of my life. I had never taken the time to see her as anything more than that, but my mother had. My mother had seen her as family, someone who had earned more than just a paycheck. She had been a friend, a confidant, someone my mother trusted with her life. It struck me then, the realization that I had failed her. I had failed both of them. I had taken my mother's love for granted, assuming it would always be there, waiting for me. But love wasn't something to be stored away in a corner. It wasn't something you could ignore until it was convenient. And in the end, my mother had left everything to the one person who had truly been there for her, the one person who had shown her real care and devotion. I reached for the letter, my mother's letter, the one she had written for Lan. It was sealed with wax, just as her will had been. I hadn't opened it yet. It was strange. Part of me didn't want to. I had no idea what it contained, but part of me knew that it was the last piece of her, the final message she had left behind. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The words were familiar, yet strange. It was as though she were speaking to me, yet at the same time she was speaking to Lan, to the one person who had known her best. Lan, my dear, my time has come, and I leave you everything because you deserve it. You have given me more than I could ever ask for. You have loved me when my children were too busy to care, and you have cared for me when I was too old to care for myself. I trust you, Lan. Please use this wealth wisely, but above all, remember this: you are family. You have always been family, and I am sorry I never told you this before. I should have. There it was, the words I had never heard, the words I could never have imagined. My mother had given everything to Lan, not just because she was loyal, but because she had been the one who truly saw her, truly loved her without expectation. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter in my hands. My siblings had left by now, each of them retreating to their own lives, their own worlds, as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. I didn't know what to do with this information. How could I go back to them, to the family I had once known, and tell them the truth? How could? I explained to them that they had lost everything, not just a fortune, but something far more valuable, the love and respect of a mother who had given up on waiting for them. I stood up from the table and walked out to the garden. It was overgrown, the once meticulously cared-for plants now untended. My mother would have hated this. She had always prided herself on maintaining the garden, on having the perfect flowers and the neatest rows of vegetables. But now it was wild. The plants had taken over, reclaiming what was once hers. And I thought perhaps that was how things were meant to be. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new. Perhaps my mother had left this mess for me to clean up. Not the house, not the wealth, but the relationships that had been neglected, the love that had been lost, the guilt that had festered. I stood there in the overgrown garden, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on me. But there was a flicker of hope, too. A flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back. I had lost everything, but perhaps that was the first step toward finding something real again. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep running away from it. The days after my mother's death seemed to blur together. I found myself going through the motions, walking into rooms I couldn't remember entering, sitting at the table without any real sense of purpose. I didn't know what to do with myself, and the house, once filled with the warmth of my mother's presence, now felt like an abandoned museum, frozen in time, empty except for the lingering echoes of memories I had ignored for too long. I didn't go back to work. I didn't know if I could. I had always prided myself on my career, on my ability to climb the ladder, to excel in a world where success was measured by numbers, not feelings. But now, in the wake of my mother's passing, all those accolades seemed meaningless. The business deals, the promotions, the raises, they were all just distractions. Distractions from the truth I had been running from for years. I had neglected my mother. I had neglected her love, her care, her need for companionship. I had traded her for a career that didn't even want me anymore. I could feel the weight of my mother's absence everywhere I went. The house, so grand and impressive on the outside, felt cold and lifeless now. I couldn't bring myself to go through her things, to sort through her belongings. I didn't want to face the reality that she was really gone, that I had let her slip away without ever truly seeing her. I had always told myself I would make it up to her when I had more time, when I had more success, when I was settled. But I was never settled. I had spent my life running, chasing success, and now that it was all gone, I was left with nothing but regret. Lan had been the one to pick up the pieces. It wasn't just that she had cared for my mother physically, though that was a part of it. She had been there for her emotionally. She had given my mother what I never could, the comfort of a listening ear, the companionship that only comes from truly knowing someone. I had always dismissed Lan as the help, as though her presence was merely functional. But now I saw the truth. Lan had been a better son to my mother than I ever had. She had loved her, and in the end, my mother had trusted her more than she trusted any of us. I had always been so focused on my own life, my own needs, that I had forgotten the most important thing, family. But family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters, about being there for the people who need you, even when they don't ask. Lan had shown up. I hadn't. The shame was suffocating. I spent the following days pacing around the house, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes. I walked through the rooms that I had once called mine. The furniture that had been arranged just so, the paintings that my mother had spent hours choosing. Everything in the house spoke of a life that was no longer mine to control. Every corner, every surface seemed to carry a reminder of what I had lost. I could almost hear my mother's voice, soft and steady, guiding me through the rooms, teaching me how to care for the things that mattered. But I had been too busy to listen. I found myself drawn to the library. It had always been my mother's favorite room. She spent hours there, reading, writing letters, reflecting. The walls were lined with shelves of books, most of them untouched for years. I ran my fingers across the spines, feeling the dust that had settled in the absence of my mother's presence. I pulled out a book at random, a collection of letters from a famous poet she had admired. As I flipped through the pages, I found a note tucked inside the cover. It was written in my mother's handwriting, a letter she had written to me when I was in college. My dear son, I know you think you have everything figured out. You've always been so determined, so driven, but please don't forget what matters. Don't forget what makes life worth living. The achievements, the success, they don't matter if you lose the people who matter most. I closed the book and set it back on the shelf, a knot tightening in my chest. My mother had known, she had known what I had been too blind to see. And now it was too late. I had lost her, and all the success in the world couldn't bring her back. The anger and frustration began to build up inside me. It wasn't just at myself. It was at my siblings, at the entire situation. We had all failed her. We had all taken her for granted. And now, because of one woman, one person who had truly cared for her, my mother had left everything behind. I had always thought I was entitled to her love, her wealth, her everything. But now I saw the truth. I had never earned it. Lan had earned it. I found myself at a crossroads. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back and change the past. I couldn't undo the years I had spent ignoring my mother's needs. But there was something I could do. There was still a chance to make things right. I walked out into the garden, the same garden my mother had loved so much. The flowers were still blooming, but the weeds had started to take over. The hedges were untrimmed, the grass untended. My mother had always made sure the garden was immaculate, but now it had been abandoned, left to grow wild. It felt like a reflection of my own life, neglected, overrun with the consequences of my inattention. I knelt down, my hands brushing the overgrown grass, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything. I had been so focused on the future, on what I could achieve, that I had forgotten the present. I had forgotten that life was not just about what we built for ourselves, but about what we built with the people we loved. And now my mother was gone, and I was left with nothing but the ruins of what could have been. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands, and looked around the garden one last time. It was time to make a change. Not for my mother, she was gone and I could never bring her back, but for me, I had to stop running. I had to face the truth and start living for something more than just success. I walked back into the house, feeling a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't too late to change. It wasn't too late to make things right, even if it meant rebuilding from the ground up. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. The days that followed blurred into one another, like a long stretch of unbroken gray sky. The initial shock of the will had faded, but the emptiness it left behind seemed to grow with each passing hour. I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that hung over me, nor could I outrun the guilt that clung to me like a shadow, growing longer and darker with every step I took. I found myself wandering through the house more and more, aimlessly moving from room to room, unable to settle. The rooms felt like they were closing in on me, the air heavy with memories and regrets. Every corner seemed to hold a piece of my past that I had long neglected, a piece of my mother's life that I had only just begun to understand. The house that once felt like home now felt like a prison of my own making. The walls seemed to whisper accusations, and the silence felt suffocating. I had never fully appreciated the magnitude of my mother's presence until it was gone. And now, without her, the house was just an empty shell, filled with things that no longer mattered. Lan, however, was different. I had seen her a few times in the days, following the reading of the will. She had come to collect her things, but she didn't seem to want to stay in the house any longer than necessary. Her movements were quiet and deliberate, as though she were carefully trying to avoid stirring up any more memories. She never spoke much, but her presence was comforting in a way I couldn't quite explain. She was the one person who understood the house, who understood my mother. I had tried to reach out to her once, to ask her how she was holding up, but the words felt hollow, empty. She had smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had always been reserved, but now she seemed distant, withdrawn. I knew she was grieving, but I also knew that her grief was different from mine. She had lost someone she had truly loved, someone she had cared for without reservation. I had lost a mother, but I had also lost the chance to make things right. I couldn't blame Lan. I couldn't blame anyone but myself. I had spent so many years focused on my own ambitions, on building a career, on achieving success, that I had forgotten what truly mattered. And now, everything I had worked for felt hollow. The promotions, the accolades, the wealth, they were all empty without the love and connection that I had so carelessly neglected. One evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the fireplace. The fire was out, and the room was cold. The room that had once been filled with laughter and conversation now stood silent, as though it too was grieving. I ran my fingers along the armrest of the couch, the familiar texture comforting in its own way, but it was not enough. I thought about the letter my mother had written to Lan. I had read it over and over, each time hoping that it would offer some kind of explanation, some kind of comfort. But each time it only deepened the ache in my chest. She had loved Lan in a way she had never loved any of us. She had trusted her when she could no longer trust us, and she had given her everything. The realization hit me harder each time. My mother had chosen Lan. She had chosen the woman who had cared for her, who had loved her, when I had been too busy to even ask how she was doing. I stood up abruptly, the tension building in my chest. I couldn't sit here anymore. I couldn't just wait for things to change. I needed to do something. I needed to face what I had done. I needed to apologize, not just to my mother, but to Lan, to everyone I had neglected in my pursuit of success. I didn't know how to make things right, but I knew that I had to start somewhere. The next day, I made my way to Lan's apartment. It was a small, modest place, tucked away in a quiet part of the city. I had never been there before, had never taken the time to even ask where she lived. But now, as I stood outside her door, I felt a strange sense of unease. I wasn't sure what I was expecting or what I was hoping to find. But I knew that I had to apologize, to try to make amends, even if it was too late. I knocked on the door and waited. For a moment there was no response. Then I heard footsteps from inside and the door slowly creaked open. Lan stood there, her eyes soft but wary, as though she had been expecting this moment but wasn't sure how to face it. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to deal with right now," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "But I need to say something. I need to apologize." Lan didn't speak, but she stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, but then I stepped inside, feeling like I was crossing a threshold I had never even noticed before. The apartment was simple, yet cozy. There was a warmth to it that I hadn't expected, and it made me realize how cold and empty my own life had been. "I've been a terrible son," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've spent my entire life thinking about what I wanted, about what I could achieve. I never took the time to see what my mother needed, what she really wanted, and now she's gone. I can never take back the years I've wasted, but I'm here because I want to make it right. I want to help you. I want to be part of her legacy, even if I don't deserve it." Lan remained silent, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. She looked away, as if trying to process what I had said. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to fix everything that had been broken. All I knew was that I had to try. After a long pause, Lan finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. "It's not just about money, you know," she said. "It's about love. Your mother didn't leave me everything because I was a better person than you. She left it because I was there for her, because I showed her care when she needed it. You don't have to fix anything with money or possessions. What matters is what's inside. What matters is how you make people feel." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had always thought that success, wealth, and power were what mattered. But now I saw the truth. It was never about any of that. It was about love. It was about being there for the people who mattered, about giving them what they truly needed, not just what they asked for. "I want to help," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I want to make things right, if there's anything I can do, anything at all." Lan shook her head, cutting me off. "You don't need to do anything for me," she said softly. "You need to do something for yourself. You need to find your way back to the people who love you. That's what matters." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I understood. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I knew that I couldn't keep running away from the truth. I had to face it, no matter how hard it was. I thanked Lan and left her apartment that day with a sense of resolve. It wasn't about the house, the money, or the inheritance. It was about something far deeper, something I had been searching for all my life, without even realizing it. And now I was finally ready to find it. It had been weeks since I last saw Lan. After our conversation, I had left her apartment with a new sense of purpose, but also with a feeling of deep uncertainty. She had spoken the truth, and it had rattled me in ways I wasn't prepared for. She had told me that I needed to find my way back to the people who loved me, but what did that even mean? How could I begin to repair something so broken? Could I? The weight of my mother's death and the consequences of my own neglect still weighed heavily on me. I had attempted to reach out to my siblings to explain the situation, but it had done little to ease the tension between us. We had grown so far apart, each of us swallowed up in our own lives, that it seemed like we were no longer a family. We were just strangers who happened to share the same blood, and in that blood there was a history of bitterness and neglect that no one was willing to address. I didn't want to keep running from the truth anymore. I couldn't, but facing it head-on was far more complicated than I had imagined. I had tried to reconnect with my mother's legacy, but in doing so, I had realized that it wasn't just my mother who I had neglected. It was everything that truly mattered. Her life, her love, her sacrifice, it had all been too easily overlooked by me, consumed by the pursuit of things that, in the end, held no meaning. I found myself walking the familiar paths of the garden once more. The flowers had long since bloomed and withered, but there was a small patch of roses that still stood, bright against the overgrowth. My mother had planted those roses herself, years ago, and had tended to them with an obsessive care. She had always believed that roses symbolized the fleeting nature of life, and how important it was to cherish every moment. But I had missed that message, just as I had missed so many others. That morning, I knelt beside the rose bush and gently pruned the dead branches. It was a small act, but it was one that made me feel like I was doing something right. I wasn't sure what I was trying to fix, whether it was the garden, my past mistakes, or the family that had fallen apart, but it was a start. I knew I had to begin somewhere. As I stood up, I looked around the garden, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe this was where it would all begin. Maybe, just maybe, this overgrown, neglected garden was a metaphor for my life. But it wasn't too late to take control, to prune the mistakes, to plant new seeds of change. That afternoon, I decided to do something that felt incredibly foreign to me. I called my siblings. I didn't know what I was hoping for, or what kind of reception I would get. Would they even want to speak to me after everything that had happened? Would they resent me even more for what had transpired? But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that the distance between us didn't hurt. I needed to reach out. Even if it was just a small step, it was something. The phone rang for what seemed like an eternity before my older brother picked up. His voice, when it came through, was guarded, like he was bracing for confrontation. "Hello," he said, the word clipped tight. "Hey, it's me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know we haven't talked much, but I need to say something." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, waiting for me to continue. "I messed up," I said, my throat tightening. "I haven't been the brother I should have been, and I haven't been the son either. I took Mom for granted. I thought there would be more time, and now there's nothing left but regret." He sighed, a heavy, frustrated sigh that spoke volumes more than any words could. "We all did," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "But I can't undo it. None of us can. She made her choice." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of his words. "But I want to try to fix things, even if it's too late. I don't want us to keep pretending everything is fine." Another long silence passed, and I could almost feel the tension between us, as though it were a physical force pulling at both of us. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, an apology, an acknowledgement, a miracle of reconciliation. But when he finally spoke again, it wasn't what I had hoped for. "You can't fix it," he said quietly. "But you can start by being better. You don't have to keep running from everything." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking deep into my chest. He wasn't offering forgiveness. He wasn't saying that everything could go back to how it was before, but he wasn't shutting me out either. It was a small crack in the wall that had grown between us. "I'll try," I said. "That's all I can do, right?" He didn't respond immediately, but after a moment he let out a deep breath. "Yeah, that's all any of us can do." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't a perfect resolution, it wasn't even close, but it was a start. And that was more than I had expected. I felt the first flicker of hope in weeks. There was a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, and maybe, just maybe, find a way back to what we had lost. Later that evening, I made my way back to Lan's apartment. The garden outside was blooming, the flowers once again reaching toward the sky. But this time, I wasn't just looking at the roses. I was looking at the bigger picture. I was ready to face the truth, to stop pretending that things could stay the same. Everything had changed, and I was finally ready to change with it. I stood outside her door for a moment, unsure of what to say or how to begin. I had apologized to my siblings, but I hadn't yet made amends with Lan. She had been the constant in my mother's life, the one person who had been there when I hadn't been. And I had neglected her just as much as I had neglected my mother. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. She opened it slowly, her eyes soft but cautious. She had no reason to trust me, not yet, but I was ready to earn that trust. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I want to help. I don't know what I can do to make up for everything, but I want to start. I want to make things right, not just with the house, but with you. You've been there for my mother, I should have been there for both of you, and I'm sorry." Lan didn't say anything at first. She just stood there looking at me, her expression unreadable. For a long moment the silence stretched between us, but then, finally, she spoke. "You can't fix the past," she said softly, "but you can start by being a better person now." It wasn't much, but it was enough. The house felt different now, as if a new chapter was beginning, one that didn't have all the answers but at least had a sense of purpose. After months of walking through these empty rooms, haunted by memories of things undone, I had come to realize that the house itself, this monument to success and failure, wasn't what truly mattered. It was the people. It was the relationships I had ignored, the ones that had always been there but that I had taken for granted. And now, as I stood in the living room, I knew that the work wasn't done. It would never be done, but I had to start somewhere. I had to make things right. It had been a few weeks since my conversation with Lan, and in that time, something inside of me had shifted. I had begun to reach out to people, My siblings, friends, old colleagues, people I had neglected over the years. I had started to open up, to listen, and to accept that making things right meant confronting my own shortcomings. It wasn't going to be easy, and I couldn't undo the past, but I could take responsibility for the future, and that was the first step. That morning, I had made a decision. I would begin by honoring my mother's legacy in the way she would have wanted me to. I would take care of the things she had left behind, not just the physical things, but the emotional and personal ones too. I would make sure that Lan's presence in this house, my mother's house, wasn't just a footnote in our family's history. It was time to embrace what my mother had given her. It was time to honor the trust my mother had placed in Lan. I called Lan again. It had been a few weeks since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure how she would respond. But I couldn't keep waiting for things to magically fall into place. I had to act. This time when she answered, her voice was softer, less guarded than before. "Yes," she said, her voice still tinged with the tiredness I had come to expect from her. "Lan," I said, my voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I think it's time we sit down and talk about how we move forward. I don't want this house, this legacy, to be something that divides us. I want to make things right for both of us." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then, finally, she spoke. "I'm listening," she said simply. It was a small opening, but it was enough. I asked her to meet me at the house, the place where it all began and where I hoped it could all begin again. When I arrived, I found Lan standing by the garden, the same place where I had been only a few days earlier. The roses had bloomed even brighter since I last saw them. The garden, like me, was starting to heal. "I've been thinking a lot too," Lan said, her gaze fixed on the roses. "About your mother, about what she meant to both of us, and about what she wanted." I nodded. "I've realized something. All this time I've been so focused on what I wanted, what I thought I deserved, that I ignored what really mattered. My mother gave everything to you because you showed her love when none of us did. You took care of her, you saw her, and I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner." Lan didn't respond at first. She just looked at the roses, her fingers gently brushing the petals as if she were weighing my words. Then she turned toward me, her face softening. "I know," she said quietly. "And it's okay, you don't need to apologize anymore. Your mother knew what she was doing. And she did it because she loved me just like I loved her. But you're here now, and that's what matters. I know you're trying, and that means something." Her words hit me like a wave, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. There was no magic solution to what had happened. No easy fix to the years I had lost, the relationships I had damaged. But in that moment, I realized something crucial. The only thing that could truly heal the wounds was time and effort. I had to show up. I had to prove that I was willing to change, not just for Lan, but for myself. We walked inside together, and for the first time, the house didn't feel so empty. It felt full, not of possessions or memories, but of the possibility of healing. There was work to be done, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But this house, this legacy my mother had left behind, didn't belong to the past. It didn't belong to the mistakes I had made. It was a place that could hold the future. It was a place where I could make amends and build something meaningful, something worth passing on. I asked Lan to stay, to help me with the next steps. She hesitated at first, as if she wasn't sure if she wanted to be involved any longer. But I promised her that I wasn't asking her to take responsibility for everything. I was asking her to help me honor my mother's legacy together. We could keep the house, but we would share it, together. "I don't want to do this alone," I admitted. "I've made too many mistakes, and I can't fix everything by myself. But with you here, maybe we can rebuild. Maybe we can make this place a home again." Lan nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. "I'll help, but only if you promise me something." "Anything," I said without hesitation. "Promise me that you'll keep showing up, that you won't leave again." The weight of her words sank in, and I realized just how much my absence had affected not only my mother, but also Lan. I had been so caught up in my own life, so consumed by my own ambitions, that I hadn't seen the impact of my neglect. But now I understood. It wasn't enough to just show up for a moment. It had to be consistent. It had to be real. "I promise," I said, my voice steady, "I won't disappear again." We spent the next few hours going through the house, taking inventory of everything my mother had left behind. I couldn't bring myself to look at the papers, the bank statements, or the property records. Instead, I focused on the things that mattered. I focused on the small, personal items that spoke of my mother's life. The framed photographs, the trinkets from her travels, the handwritten notes she had left for us. As we worked, Lan and I began to talk more. About my mother, about our lives, about the things that we had shared and the things we had never said. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of silence, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were making progress. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something important. I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, I had the chance to make things right. And it wasn't going to be perfect, but it was going to be enough. I had spent years running from the truth, from the things that really mattered. But now I was ready to face it. I was ready to rebuild not just the house, but my life. And this time I wasn't doing it alone. Lan had been my mother's caregiver, but she had also become a reminder of the love and care that I had forgotten. And in that love, there was a new beginning, not just for the house, but for everything that had been broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked over at Lan. She was still sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, but there was a sense of peace in her demeanor. We had both been broken, but we were starting to heal. And that was enough.